Michael Fallon, Member of Parliament for Sevenoaks, and I have been asked to chair the proceedings this morning, which I have great pleasure in doing. It's very easy to do. In a world of collapsing values, we can offer you two AAA rated speakers this morning. On my right, John Redwood, Member of Parliament for Wokingham, former Cabinet Minister, and of course author of the Conservative Economic Competitiveness Report. He will speak to you in a moment. But first, on my left, Matthew Elliott of the Taxpayers Alliance, which has been, I think, one of the most successful campaigning organisations in such a short time, and has, I think, helped to shape the debate on tax tolerance, and may well indeed have been the origin of the Conservative proposal for an Office of Budget Responsibility in the end. But first of all, Matthew Elliott.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Michael, and apologies for being late. I was delayed by a taxi. This is actually the first time I've spoken at a Conservative Party conference. And before I started putting my notes together, I asked a friend who's on the candidates list for any tips about what I should say in my speech. And one of the things he said is you should also always have a quote in your speech from Winston Churchill. So I googled Winston Churchill plus quotes, and I found one that I think is particularly apt for today's economic circumstances. Churchill said, "I contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself up by the handle." Yeah. I think this really sort of rather defines the situation we're in at the moment and the approach the current government's taking. They're trying to keep on increasing taxes, trying to increase tax into prosperity, and of course it won't make any difference, it won't actually help the situation. And I think it also gives some lessons for the Conservative Party about what they should be thinking about when they're drawing up their economic plans for the coming years. For my contribution today, I'd just like to talk about three things. First of all, I'd like to look at some of the recent polling, some of the post-credit crunch polling, and see how attitudes have changed over the past 12 months to tax and spend. Then I'd like to talk about the implications of this polling for the Conservative Party's strategy on tax and spend. And finally, I'd like to just put together a few non-controversial policies, simple policies that the Conservative Party could adopt between now and the election to help shape their fiscal policy. So first of all, the polling. One of the things that people say to me in the Conservative Party when I speak to them is, yes, of course, Matthew, we agree with you on taxes. You know, we want lower taxes too. We believe that low taxes are good for the economy. But surely the public aren't on our side. Surely if you look at the polling, the public don't want lower taxes. Surely if we start talking about lower taxes, we're going to start isolating people. Now, there's been a dramatic shift in public opinion over the past 12 months with the credit crunch. So whereas a year ago it was fairly sort of even Stevens about whether the public wanted lower taxes or believed that politicians could deliver lower taxes, now there's a clear majority of people who actually believe this to be the case. One key area where this has happened is green taxes. We did a poll just a few days ago repeating a question we did a year ago on green taxes, and we found that an overwhelming 74% of voters now believe that politicians are not serious about the environment and are using the issue as an excuse to raise more revenue from green taxes. That was actually a range of options, so 74% of the public. So the idea now that politicians, when they say we want green taxes to help the environment, they're just not believed. Only 11% of people actually believe them when they make those statements. So the whole green agenda has changed, partly because of the credit crunch and partly because I think different green groups have been very effective at putting out that message. And to be fair, we've seen a shift in the Conservative Party's strategy in this area. It hasn't been an obvious shift, but if you remember, a year ago, George Osborne talked a lot about pay as you burn, not pay as you earn. Now, I haven't heard that phrase for quite a while now from the Shadow Chancellor, or indeed from David Cameron. And in fact, I think it's actually quietly been dropped. Yeah, of course, they'll still talk a lot about green rhetoric, and perhaps even make lip service to pay as you burn rather than pay as you earn. but we're not going to see any dramatic shift in tax policy in this area. So that's one area where the Conservative Party have actually shifted, and I think that's both good politics, as the polling suggests, but also good policy as well, because if you actually look at green taxes, it's the very poorest people in our society who they actually harm the most, because they're consumption taxes. Another area of polling we look at is the area of government waste. One of our regular tracker questions, they're questions which you ask again and again to see these shifts in public opinion, is to ask people how much, for every £100 the government spends, how much of that do you think is wasted? We give people increments of £5 to choose from. What we found is that actually 59% of voters now believe that the government is wasting more than £20 in every £100 it spends. It's a huge proportion, 59%. So the idea that if a party came up with some credible ways in which of cutting back on waste, the idea that now the Labour Party could launch an attack saying, look, every penny we spend is now well spent. The idea that if you cut spending, you do cut teachers, doctors, nurses. That attack simply doesn't wash anymore. People have seen the fact that there's waste in the system, and people have actually clocked that. We also asked people about the level of spending as well. And just one thing, with all our polling, we try and make it as fair as possible. So when we ask them about spending, we make it clear in the introduction to the question that thinking about government spending that's used for hospitals and schools, we actually try and plug it in the direction to make it as difficult as possible for us. We say, look at spending. Do you want spending to increase, decrease, or stay the same? What we found in the latest survey was that 67% of people agree with the statement, the government spends too much and therefore taxes us too much. And that's up from 64% last August. So, 6% increase over the past year. So we're seeing some serious changes here in public attitudes. And I think the most significant thing we've found with our polling is the fact that if you look at floating voters, those voters who are not aligned with any political party, they're actually the voters who are most keen on tax cuts. They're the ones who are most keen on actually believing you actually could actually cut waste and cut spending. So the idea that it would be not in the interests of the Conservative Party or the Liberal Democrats or any party to actually go for the tax cutting vote is simply not correct. The polling doesn't stack that up. So, what are the implications of this shift in public opinion for Conservative Party tax strategy? Two things I want to touch on in this area. First of all, what Nick Clegg was saying in his conference a few weeks back. Secondly, the danger of raising unrealistic expectations. And actually, thirdly, just looking at the 1979 general election. So first of all, Nick Clegg. We saw at the Lib Dem conference, I think, quite a clear change in Lib Dem tax policy. If you cast your mind back to the 1990s, the Lib Dems were the party most in favour of increasing taxes. They had the famous policy of putting a penny on income tax to pay for education. They were seen as the high spending party. And I think the fact that Nick Clegg actually managed to win a conference vote on a lower tax platform, cutting tax by 4 pence, is actually quite significant. Now, granted, if you look at the details of his policy, it's debatable about whether it's actually a legitimate cut in tax, whether it's a real cut in tax, or whether it's just sort of shifting money about. But I think the message the public got from party conference, the Lib Dem party conference, is the fact that now they're keen on cutting taxes. So for a mainstream political party now to say that is very significant. So it means that if the Conservative Party now would have a clearer position on tax cuts, they won't be the only party talking about this. They won't be the odd one out. So I think that's hugely significant.